today. Good morning, colleagues online and all participants. I welcome you all to today's consultation on the proposed SADC model law on prison oversight. This is a part of our continuing process of consultation and trying to ensure inclusivity so that all stakeholders can participate in our process of development of this important model legislation. I wish to sincerely thank our keynote speaker for this morning, Honorable Speaker, Advocate Jacob Francis Mudenda, who is Speaker of the Parliament of Zimbabwe. And we are grateful that he found time from his busy schedule to be with us today and to grace our day-to-day, despite that he's in the midst of very, very busy schedule at national level. If you allow me, without further ado, to simply introduce our keynote speaker, Honorable Advocate Jacob Francis Nzwida Milimo Mudenda, hails from Hwange District in Zimbabwe. He is currently the Speaker of the Parliament of Zimbabwe. Politically, he is a member of the Zambia African Union Patriotic Front Party, popularly known as ZANU-PF, where he is a member of the Politburo and the Central Committee. Advocate Mudenda holds the lofty position of Secretary General of the ZANU-PF Party. As Speaker of Parliament, Advocate Mudenda is Head of Parliament of the Republic of Zimbabwe. He also served in the past as a Member of Parliament for 10 years after independence of Zimbabwe, from 1985 to 1990 and from 1995 to 2000. He is currently serving his third term as Speaker of Parliament since 2013. Honorable Speaker Advocate Mudenda has been a long-serving member of the Executive Committee of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, where he has consistently contributed to shaping the forum's strategic direction. He also serves currently as Vice Chairperson of the Legal Subcommittee and has at various times in the past actually served as its chair. Speaker Mudenda chairs the Strategic Lobby Group of Speakers for the transformation of SADC-PF into a SADC regional parliament. We may recall that for his unbridled leadership and professional antecedents, Honorable Speaker Mudenda is aptly referred to as the Dean of SADC Speakers of Parliament. Allow me now to welcome Honorable Speaker to take the floor and to deliver his keynote address. Honorable Speaker.
Good morning, moderator. Good morning, participants. Good morning, viewers. I think the issue of correctional services has been on the shoulders of society for a long time immemorial. Those that have offended in other countries were put in concentration camps. In other jurisdictions, they had to move those so-called convicts and carried to far lands. And I think, if you recall, this is what happened in the UK in the 18th century, 19th century, when some convicts were shipped to Australia as part of punishment, so that they would be away from society in the UK. So this has been a phenomenon bedeviling humankind. However, what is important is that every human being is born innocent. They carry that innocence, they carry that human dignity, which is an inalienable right. For that reason, it is therefore important that those that find themselves on the wrong side of the law should not be treated as outcasts, but with the spirit of hope that they have the possibility of reforming themselves, of repenting, and rediscovering themselves in terms of the possibilities of self actualization. It is in that spirit that the modern law that has been crafted must be given all its support because it has all the ingredients of hope and restoration of someone's human dignity. Now, in Zimbabwe, we have tried to ensure that that spirit is canvassed and respected. That is why we have two systems of correctional services. There's one which we call open prison, where we have those inmates that have demonstrated greater acceleration towards their restoration of their dignity and personalities are transferred to these facilities. We have one open prison for females inmates and one for male inmates. And these facilities have proven that there is a possibility that in the long run, these inmates will quickly be rehabilitated in society. And these open prisons, correctional services, we give them opportunities for skills training, general education, so that they can acquire academic levels up to degree levels. That facility is extended also to those that are in non-open prisons. I was amazed when I was invited as guest of honor at the graduation of students from the Institute of Commerce and Administration. Among those graduating, some of them with first class passes, were 22 inmates 2 years ago. This demonstrated to me that where we have an attitude of rehabilitation, that can be exercised during the time when these inmates are incarcerated. Now, one other area that is important is that of training of the officers in charge of these correctional services. It is important that during the training of these officers who will have day-to-day interface with the inmates must have an attitude that is humane, that respects the inmates as human beings with dignity, and not treat them as people who must be punished hard, but rather who must be rehabilitated. That interface must create a human relationship which encourages the inmates that they are and do have the possibility of reformation. The other important issue that emerges from the modern law is one of looking at the complaints by the inmates. In Zimbabwe, we have avenues for attending to these complaints. In our parliament, we have a committee responsible for defense, home affairs, and security services. And a part of their function is to visit correctional services, to receive complaints there and look at the conditions of these inmates, including their general health, where they sleep, the nature of their clothing or uniforms. And through such oversight responsibilities of this committee, we have been able to influence policy, and the uniforms of our inmates have been changed for better. Further, we have established through our constitutional provision an independent complaints commission headed by a judge of the High Court, a retired judge of the High Court. And this commission, among other responsibilities, is tasked to visit correctional services and come up with recommendations on how best we can improve the reformation process of inmates in these correctional services. Then, of course, the justices, judges, and magistrates are allowed to visit correctional services centers, especially if during trial an inmate raises questions of complaints, especially denial of food and so on, or inhabitable conditions in prison. The judge or magistrate is allowed at law through our Criminal Codification Act to visit such an institution and establish the facts for themselves. It is therefore important that we support this modern law, which is very progressive, and it is my hope that all parliaments in Africa, within our own SADC region, do embrace this modern law and ensure that it is ratified and domesticated into our municipal law. I'll stop there for a while in case there are any questions.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, colleagues, for your attention. Honorable Speaker has opened the floor for questions, so if there are any interventions, colleagues, they would be welcome at this stage. And even if I do it in reverse, let me introduce myself. My name is Claire Musonda. I'm a program manager for the Regional Parliamentary Model Laws Oversight Committee and the Regional Women's Parliamentary Caucus, and I'll be your facilitator for today, or moderator. So if there are any comments on Mr. Speaker's very scintillating and insightful presentation, maybe we could have them. I'm looking at, please show, indicate by show of hands on the group, on the call, so I can invite you to take the floor. So far, I see none. And if there are none, Honorable Speaker, I would simply like to, first of all, indicate that as we proceed, we do have our lead consultant in the house, Ms. Anneke Miekota. I hope I got her name right. She's the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Litigation Center. She's an advocate in her own right and a litigator. And she's been tasked jointly with a professor from a South African university to assist with the development of the model law. And she will be presenting the key provisions of the model law to the meeting. And before I invite her to take the floor, I'd like to say that as much as we would wish that Honorable Mr. Speaker stays with us throughout the consultative meeting, we do realize that he has a tight schedule, and he did just take time for us to come and set the context for us here and all the participants in this meeting. So I think that if time will not allow him to be with us, he will be free to leave. It may not be possible for us to interact with him again beyond this time. So I wanted to just say that in case Mr. Speaker wishes to leave, but we would really, really like if he could stay. But we understand that his schedule is quite busy. It's quite tight. And unless Mr. Speaker wants to say something before I invite the lead consultant.
Well, learning does not end. I would want to expose myself to Aneke and hear what she says. And I'll be here for a couple more minutes to listen to the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And with that, I would invite Ms. Aneke Niekota to proceed to make the presentation of the key provisions of the model law. Ms. Aneke, please. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, Ms. Misunda, for leading us this morning. I have taken detailed notes, Honorable Speaker, of the examples you've given of Zimbabwe, and I think Zimbabwe sets a very critical example for the rest of the region around rehabilitation and around prison oversight. So just to say that the process for developing the model law has sought to not invent something new, but actually take the best practices that exist throughout the region and to ensure that those best practices are then pulled together into one piece of legislation. And when countries then look at the model law, they need not, they would have the choice which sections to adopt depending on their current circumstances and how they would like to strengthen their existing laws. So it might not be that one would adopt a whole new law, but actually just look at the examples of other countries that have, for example, strong provisions in the Human Rights Commission Act or in the Criminal Codification Act, and then incorporate that into other laws within the SADC region. So I'll just very briefly go through what is in the draft outline to show sort of the areas that the outline intends to cover. Just for the purpose of the discussion this morning, the Honourable Speaker have mentioned that the Portfolio Committee on Defence and Home Affairs and Security actually conducts visits. I think this is a best practice. It's something that does not exist throughout the region. And I think that if we look at parliamentary oversight, it is critical that members of parliament actually see what goes on in detention facilities to be able to do that oversight. And I think the section in the model law that would deal with parliamentary oversight would really benefit from input from the Honourable Speaker and other members of portfolio committees where there is this sort of active oversight to think through how can we include these sort of best practice in a model law, not in a way to prescribe to parliaments what to do, but in a way of saying that this really has supported improving conditions in detention. So I'll just very briefly go through the outline for the model law. And the key thing really is that the model law tries to highlight the principles that we already adhere to and that the Honourable Speaker mentioned around human rights and dignity, the independence of oversight mechanisms, and supporting and empowering prisoners to really be able to highlight their complaints. The focus is on accountability and transparency of correctional service institutions themselves, but also accountability and transparency of oversight mechanisms, so that they can actually tell the public what their findings are and be accountable in terms of their processes of oversight. And part of what the model law looks at, and we'll speak a bit about this later, is also the issue of mandatory reporting and how we can perhaps improve the collection of data so that oversight can be conducted not just by visiting the prisons, but also by receiving the data that one would need to conduct that oversight. So that, for example, if a portfolio committee or an independent complaints commission visits a prison once a year, at least following such visits, they ought to be able to access data to be able to see whether changes had been made. And this includes a range of data, and we'll deal with this just a little bit later on. The other thing, and this is, as the Honourable Speaker mentioned, there are many different oversight mechanisms, whether it's judiciaries or official visitors like members of Parliament or independent bodies designated to conduct oversight. The idea is not to have only one mechanism, but actually, as is the case in Zimbabwe, we will have these different mechanisms working simultaneously and conducting oversight simultaneously, because they do actually look at slightly different issues, and they have different perspectives on prison conditions and what happens within detention. I think that's that combination of different oversight mechanisms that ought to really be encouraged. So within the model law, the idea is to take examples from existing laws in countries around the complaints mechanisms that prisoners can use, and looking both at internal complaints mechanisms and in external complaint mechanisms. And a key issue really for oversight is to see whether or not complaints are being dealt with. So there ought to be a proper recording system of not just the complaints that prisoners make, but also how those complaints have been resolved and within what period of time. And that would really give an indication of whether all prisoners are treated fairly and on an equal basis within the correctional center itself. Another thing to note is that oversight itself happens at different levels. So actually the first body that would do oversight would be the ministry responsible for correctional services, because they are the ones who can do the very detailed assessments about whether or not correctional centers comply with domestic laws. So the model law recognizes the important role that ministries themselves have in conducting oversight, and then how that oversight ought to then also be relayed to Parliament with recommendations. In addition to, I'm not going through all the detail, but all our laws throughout SADC make provision for official visitors. And these would include, for example, members of Parliament who visit places of detention. It can include international bodies. It can include whoever a government feels ought to be included within a list of official visitors. So the model law doesn't prescribe who that ought to be, but encourages that, based on the principle of transparency, that the more people who can access prisons to look at conditions in detention, the better actually it would be in terms of improving such conditions. And the key issue really is about when an official visitor visits a correctional center, what happens with their findings? Often they would record their findings or recommendations within the visitor's book at the facility. And then the head of the facility would look at those recommendations. But as one go up, the head of the facility might not report on all those recommendations to the ministry. Neither would the ministry report on all those recommendations to the portfolio committee who looks at these issues. So there is a bit of filtering out of information when it comes to how concerns are recorded, and the model law looks at how one can strengthen that a bit. In addition, there is a long-standing practice of judges visiting places of detention. In some countries, this has been included within the performance indicators of judges themselves, where they are actually asked, and magistrates, where they are asked how often they have visited the facility that's nearby to the court. And why this is important is for a number of reasons, but probably the most obvious one would be that these are people who know what the law is around the conditions, what conditions in detention ought to be, and the rights of prisoners themselves. And they're not going to spend a lot of money getting to the facility because it's a facility within the area. So visiting judges actually have the space to do oversight more regularly. Their work permitting and those sort of things, of course. So what is very important to consider is that when visiting justices go to places of detention, they are able to see how problems within the criminal justice system manifest itself within the prison system. For example, if they go to a prison and they see that half of the inmates are awaiting trial, that's the indication of a problem within the court itself. And then it enables the court to make the necessary adjustments they need to make to reduce the number of persons awaiting trial. The same, for example, if they note that there are many people in detention with unreasonable amounts set for their bail. That could again be an indication that there's a need for training of magistrates on how bail is imposed and assessed and those sort of things. So the need for justices to visit is quite important, but it is a practice that has sort of receded a little bit throughout our region, and the model law looks at how one can actually include that in legislation itself in a more definitive way. And judges who visit places of facility would specifically look at how the complaint system is being managed. And they would also need to look at whether or not the prison is compliant with mandatory reporting requirements. So for example, when there's a death in custody, it ought to be recorded and investigated, but this often does not happen. So it would be useful if judges, for example, are able to access the death registers and make recommendations and assess whether or not these sort of legal conditions are being met. Throughout the entire region, we have national human rights institutions who have the mandate to visit places of detention. So these can be either the Ombud in a country or the National Human Rights Commission. And they have a lot of allowance in terms of how they do their visits within their existing legislation. The main question is really, once they do their annual reports on their visits, how much do they record for them when they present their annual reports to Parliament, for Parliament to actually get a good sense of the situation in places of detention? And then in some countries, not all countries, there are practices of independent visiting committees. Sometimes these are tied with the independent inspectorates, and sometimes they fall under the Department of Correctional Services or the department managing correctional centers. And the idea really with visiting committees is that these can be a group of multidisciplinary people who are located within the area of the prison, who can then on a regular basis go and do oversight, so that one saved the big oversight bodies from traveling throughout the country the whole year, but that these visiting committees then feed through their reports so that we can ensure that prison oversight happens on a more regular basis. The biggest problem in practice around independent visiting committees is that people who had volunteered to visit places of places of detention are not always trained to know what to look for. They might not always know what the prison regulations say about conditions in detention to be able to measure whether the law is compliant, and they might not know what international standards like the Nelson Mandela rules set out for the minimum standards of prisons. And then, as the Honourable Speaker also mentioned, the best case scenario is really where a country decides to have a designated independent oversight body. And this is really important because it's evolved over time to be the best practice, because it's not like judges or human rights commissions who have other duties and who have to balance their different duties. And an independent body can have the skills within the body and the expertise within the body to actually properly conduct oversight and receive complaints. There are other really good examples within the region. So, for example, all of our countries allows the president to or minister to constitute a commission of inquiry. And sometimes where one finds really in-depth systemic problems like corruption, for example, a commission of inquiry that really just looks at that one issue might be a useful way of doing things. And then there are also different practices in the region around the health professionals who either work within the prison or who see prisoners when they are referred to them at the hospital. And one of the questions that have come up repeatedly in the consultations is whether or not it's advisable to have health professionals who report to correctional services as opposed to having health professionals who report to the Ministry of Health. Just because health professionals themselves have certain ethical duties when they see cases of torture, for example, and they might be constrained in reporting on those or acting on their ethical duties if they are employed by the facility itself. So there's interesting other issues that are coming up. And then there are obviously certain groups who are particularly at risk, and it's important for oversight bodies to look at them. Just one before I end, just to note that there would be a need for training of all oversight persons to really to ensure that they are able to assess and or conduct oversight properly. And there would also be a need for oversight bodies to be able to access data. And at the moment, data is a huge problem. And a recommendation of the model law would really be to strengthen mandatory reporting. And this is really where it's useful to speak to portfolio committees and ministries to find out what's possible. And one don't want to create onerous reporting duties, but we also want to make sure that no one falls through the cracks. And sometimes if data is just collected at a national level, one might think, okay, it seems like there's no overcrowding, but if you collected data and disaggregate them per prison or per facility, one might be able to see which facilities there are then acute overcrowding in and those sort of things. So it's really about how one moves to disaggregate data and how that data then gets presented to the various levels of oversight, including at parliamentary level. And the model law speaks a bit about that. And then there's questions really about what the model law ought to say around parliamentary oversight. And this, I think, is really the purpose of the discussion today as well. If people have specific contributions about how we can strengthen parliamentary oversight within the model law itself without being prescriptive or anything like that, that could be really useful. And one thing could be just to have a set of principles around parliamentary oversight. It could be that one actually suggests that there ought to be a select committee in every parliament dealing specifically with prisons. So I'm just putting that out there, that there's many questions that remain unresolved around how to strengthen parliamentary oversight, and I look forward to hear from everyone on it. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Annika, for that insightful presentation. At this point, I'd like to invite participants to interact. Some good practices have been highlighted, starting with our keynote speaker, Honorable Speaker Mudenda, and perhaps you could share what good practices are prevailing in your countries, so we can learn from them and so that we can enrich the model law so that it has all our good practices or good practices that you may know about that would be useful for Annika to take on board. And I'm looking at the participants list. I don't see a hand. I don't see a hand there. Is there anyone who wants to take the floor now?
She's inviting people to take the floor. Let's give the others.
Honorable Speaker, would you like to take the floor again?
Have you not received any hand?
No, I can't see any.
Where are they?
See any? They're there, but maybe they're still digesting what they've heard.
If you may allow, before I go.
Yes, Honorable Speaker.
I'd like to thank Anita for her summary of the modern law. Let me address myself to the question of reports. There is always a danger of people writing reports after reports when there is no implementation. I think the modern law must insist that every report should have clear-cut recommendations for implementation. As far as our portfolio committee is concerned, when their report is tabled in the House, in fact, for all our committees, they have to give a timeline. By such a date, this must be corrected. By such a date, this recommendation must be actualized. Otherwise, you end up with an archive of reports which have not given any validation in terms of implementation. So I think there's need also to look at that aspect, that these reports should not just be reports for general, consumption. They must come up with corrective action within a given time frame. That's number one. Number two, on visits, I think the modern law should encourage family visits so that the social aspect and the social connectivity between the inmate and their families, relatives, gives them that source of feeling that they're still human beings. They still belong. In our case in Zimbabwe, we allow families to bring goodies to the inmates and have some chat. There is a very interesting occasion where one inmate came into prison and he had a sweetheart. And he was arrested at a time when there were a few weeks before they could get married. it was amazing that the lady did not reject the man because he was an inmate. So she says, my boyfriend, who is now in prison, we have agreed that we marry. And the prison officers made it possible for some church ceremony to take place within the prison confines. And there has been some allowance for this inmate to visit the wife, to keep that social, contact. And hopefully that will persist until he's out of prison and will lead a normal life. So family connection is very, very important. One other thing, the modern law should appeal to various parliaments is the question of community service penalties. You know, some minor offenses do not deserve incarceration. So let's encourage through our modern law community service penalties. X number of hours per week doing something at a school, at a clinic, and so on. That gives also a sense of being recognized that one, although you're an offender, you have been, accused, sentenced, so on, you can still be part of society by doing something excellent within that community. I think the modern law should have some section in that regard. The other area that I feel should also be looked at in Zimbabwe, we have established prison farms in order to have sources of income, but also if they are carrying out animal husbandry, part of the cattle are slaughtered to feed the inmates. Some parts of the farm, they go the vegetables and so on, so that the prisoners have nutritious food, and not porridge and beans and a little bit of salt. That's not nourishing at all. So we have farms, prison farms, dotted around our prison complexes, especially those that are outside city centers. It is also important that the modern law should speak to the involvement of the private sector. The private sector can come in to boost the national fiscus or the budget. Government has limited resources. If we can encourage the private sector to participate in our prison reform, especially on the issue of overcrowding, some prisons need to be extended. And I'm sure if we approach the private sector can inject in some capital as part of their social corporate responsibility in order to reduce crowding. The other issue which should be mandatory in the modern law is established health services. There must be a clinic, especially for those massive uh, uh, correctional services that may carry, 2,000, 3,000 inmates. You need a clinic there and a dedicated doctor. In Zimbabwe, we have tried to do that, and where specialists, specialist attention, medical attention is required. This has been allowed so that those prisoners who have some ailments that require specialist treatment, they can be released to some specialist, health facility and so on. I think that's an important element. The health of our inmates should be taken care of. Finally, I would like to say that this modern law should be discussed as soon as possible within our various parliaments. But I want to suggest that the Pan-African Parliament, which is our overall body of all parliaments from Africa, must be seized with this modern law and be an avenue for encouraging African parliaments to take the good ideas in this modern law, which are plenty of them, and ensure that the modern law achieves some accelerated acceptance at the Pan-African level. And also, through the Pan-African Parliament, the African Union should be seized with the matter so that from the Afrocentric perspective at the African Union level, there must be a change of mindset in our governments that they should not look at these correctional services as places of punishment. They are dealing with fellow human beings, and the mindset must change within the executive, that is our governments. And of course, when budget is discussed and the mindset is changed, it is possible that we can have improved budgetary allocations for our correctional services. I so submit.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Very, very insightful additions to the presentation by Aneka. I do believe that she has taken copious notes and will be revisiting those notes to enhance the provisions where they may require beefing up. But I was, I think, quite impressed by the point that the Honorable Speaker raised regarding reports. I think this is sometimes a weakness that we have of seeing reports as an end in themselves. Reports should be a harbinger to further action rather than an end in themselves to simply gather dust. I think this is a big issue in our public sector. We need to ensure. So it would be actually important for the model law to, like the Honorable Speaker suggested, to ensure that it calls for timelines within which the recommendations of such reports should be acted upon. Because indeed, these are our fellow human beings that we are dealing with, and it's important for us to treat them in a humane manner. So if there are issues that are not correct and they are reported, there needs to be a timeline within which they must be addressed. I think the Honorable Speaker has raised quite a lot of issues. As I said, I was also taking notes, so I think Aneka will also comment on that. Would you like to comment, Aneka, before we get any? I still don't have hands from the participants. I'm waiting. Oh, we have one actually. We have a hand, but maybe Mr. Kudakwashe Matibiri.
Yes.
Yes, maybe you'd like to comment before we allow the consultant to come in to comment on Honorable Speaker's presentation and yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Honorable Senator Kudakwashe Matibiri. I'm in the Parliament of Zimbabwe. There I sit in the thematic committee on human rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the presentation and the presentation from America. I just wanted to add a little bit on whether on what the law can include. I'm not so sure, but I think a way has to be found to make sure that those who complete their rehabilitation, their cycles, must be admitted back into society in such a way that they do not feel victimized again. Um, uh, uh, a lot of them are gaining fundamental skills in Zimbabwe while in prison. And so when they get out, some may need to be engaged in employment activities. And it is important that a way has to be found so that they are not segregated when it comes to employment. I thought that would be important so that society completely forgives them. Once again, I want to thank the presenters, the Speaker of Parliament, Advocate and Annette. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'll allow our
Claire,
lead consultant. Yes, Honorable Speaker.
Claire,
Yes, I can hear
Claire,
you. I can hear you, Honorable Speaker.
Before Aneka can respond, I want to confirm what the honorable member has indicated. 2 weeks ago, I visited one of our largest correctional services, and the officers, that is the prison officers, made an appeal that there should be a law that does not, well, a law that removes stigma, whereby if someone has been incarcerated and has been released, it should be, and he looks for some employment, and he should not be denied employment just because he once served in prison. I think what the honorable member has raised is something that his thematic committee and our portfolio committee on Defense and Home Affairs and Security Services, they will have to meet. He has given me that opportunity, and I am whipping him to ensure that they meet and ensure that we look at this issue, which is critical, so that those that have completed their service as inmates, they are not stigmatized for life. I think it's an excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
you,
Honorable
Mr.
Speaker. And thank you, Honorable Matibiri. I will request our lead consultant to comment at this point.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Matibiri as well. I think it's interesting that this issue was also raised when we consulted youth, the issue of job integration and what happens after release and how one can actually support people after release. And if we look at examples elsewhere in the world around prison oversight and in our region, prison oversight stops at the prison. And I think, and one of the speakers articulated it nicely in one of the other consultations, that the oversight should be about the individuals, not about the building. And how do we then include within the oversight that there's also oversight of how rehabilitation takes place, what support there is post-release, the extent to which skills training leads to formal certification and all those sort of things. So I really want to thank the honorable members of Zimbabwe's parliament, because I think this is absolutely critical, and it does help to change the mindset from being punitive, which is a tricky thing to change in this day and age. So I think we can also include it not just in the principles around the model law, but actually have a specific section just on that. And from our side, we'll certainly be in contact with the the Speaker and Member of Parliament to actually just double check the contents of those provisions as well. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Annika. I still don't see any further requests for the floor. I'm going over, maybe I give another chance. Anyone who wishes to take the floor. Okay, I have Honorable Lynette Karenyi. Kindly take the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like also to add my voice and thank our Honorable Speaker for highlighting and for managing to unpick and to give proposals. And I was so touched by his passionate ideas, and I would like maybe to add just a few. Mr. Speaker, say on the issue of gender. You know, in the prisons, I would feel that in our modern law, maybe if you can also add the issue of gender sensitive structure facilities, whereby we could even have a separate adequate facilities for women, including privacy in sanitation, access during the menstrual hygiene products, and safe sleeping areas. I feel that the prison should also ensure mothers with infants. I on that one, I know very well that most of the women, some would get there in during their pregnancy, and they could even give birth while they are still in prison. So if you can have access to suitable living conditions for those children, and maybe the facilities like for them to get playing grounds, and also some bit of some learning where they could even have activities rather than to stay with their mothers, because I know their psycho-social support is not like others outside. So they could be maybe having some depression where they can even put it to their children. So if you could have those separate places for these children, I think it will go a long way. The other one, I think on the issue of health and reproductive rights, I think we can even also have some guarantees for comprehensive health care, including prenatal, postnatal, and mental health services for these women, and also access to sexual and reproductive health. You know, we have got this issue for cervical cancer screening, the treatment of gender-based violence. So we can have even those type of things, and the prohibition for shackling or restraint during pregnancy, you know, during their labor, during their childbirth, and also rearing their children. So I strongly feel that our speaker, I know he's part of the he for she, and is a is a champion for issue of gender. I know if we can include that in our modern law for other countries, I think they can also be included, because in Zimbabwe, some other recreational facilities, they've got those facilities, and the others, I think we can even have more, so that if we have it in our modern law, our women will also benefit. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, our moderator. I so submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Karenyi. Maybe the consultant would like to comment on Honorable Karenyi's submission. Anything on children, SIHR in the model law? There's something you can pick from that submission?
Absolutely. This is a critical area. It has been raised, but I think Honorable Kari have assisted to actually clarify it much better, because people often just say pregnant women and they don't always look at postnatal care. They don't always look at the facilities that children have to adequately develop if they are with their mothers. And one of the provisions the model law does try and look at is that when justices visit places of detention, they come across women with their children, they ought to really assess whether the woman should be there in the first place and facilitate their release where possible. So I think there's various ways in which one can do that. And I think the issue of gender-sensitive facilities and the way in which you've linked that also to mental health, I think, is very important. And we'll make sure that then, and and the inclusion of cervical cancer and GBV services. This has not been mentioned before, and we'll definitely make sure that it's included. Thank you.
On the issue of mental health, I was also touched that she mentioned that, the mothers who have circumstantial children in prison may themselves not be in a good mental space. So it may also affect the children. And these children, we must always remember the children are not offenders and they are not prisoners. So what kind of psychosocial support are we giving, first of all, to the mothers, and secondly, to the children as well? Because that can have very, very long-term impact on the mental health of those children, even into adulthood and for the rest of their lives. So those are very critical issues that Honorable Kareni has raised, which also need to be addressed in our laws, and hopefully the model law can help us to do that. Are there any other comments? I still see none, no others, apart from those that we've taken so far. And I really want to thank the Honorable Speaker for staying through. We are lucky that we were able to benefit from his wisdom and vast knowledge and experience. And if we don't have any other comments, I would request perhaps if Mr. Speaker has anything further to add before we close.
Thank you, moderator. I think it is important that at our next SADC meeting, there be an item agenda on this model law so that we can discuss it from a regional perspective. And may I also appeal to you that you engage the president of the Pan-African Parliament so that they can also engage on this model law. And through the Pan-African Parliament, I think the modern law can proceed to be looked at the legal team at the African Union Commission, which works very closely with the Pan-African Parliament. And let's have a meeting of minds and improve the ecosystem of our correctional services. Thank you very much for the opportunity to attend this interface.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. We have been truly blessed to have you in this meeting, even despite your busy schedule. And I want to thank all the members that have attended and participated through their contributions and through their listening and silencing intent listening, and all the staff that have supported the members. Thank you to everyone. And as we end, I would like to share a quote from UNODC. I'm trying to just try to get it. As we conclude, it is of utmost importance. Sorry, just a minute. Let me just get that right. Yeah. Okay, so as we conclude, let's leave with this quote. It is of utmost importance that prison reform is not regarded in isolation from broader criminal justice reform. Effective prison reform is dependent on the improvement and rationalization of criminal justice policies, including crime prevention and sentencing policies, and on the care and treatment made available to vulnerable groups in the community. Reform of the prison system should therefore always take into account the needs relating to the reform of the criminal justice system as a whole and employ an integrated, multidisciplinary strategy to achieve sustainable impact. Thus, reform initiatives will usually need to encompass criminal justice institutions other than the prison service, such as the judiciary, prosecution, and police services as relevant. And I want to thank you for being change agents. If you still have any comments, any issues that you would like addressed through this model law and which you think would improve the legislative landscape in our region regarding prisons or correctional facilities, kindly do submit them through that email address that on the website. And we'll be very glad to have a look at them, and Annika will look at them. Other than that, honorable members, honorable Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you most sincerely for your participation. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, and thanks to our lead consultant, Annika, for being there and for being able to provide the guidance that she did. I wish to thank you and close the meeting at this stage. We do have one message there. I'm sure our members have read it from Malawi. Okay. Yes, I think this is the issue that we're talking about of circumstantial children. So I think it will be addressed. And if the honorable member wishes, he could submit maybe a bit more detail on the address that we have shared so that we're able to really appreciate what he's trying to say. Outside that, thank you very much for attending, and I request ICT to kindly terminate at this stage. Thank you.